Hello. We scientists have now located a gene which we scientists believe gives people the need to believe in God. In other words, this God gene releases chemicals into our body which create the impression that there is meaning in the universe.
Morality, or at least the deliberation that goes through a person's head, has pretty much been mapped out. Not in great detail yet, but they've pretty much made the case that this is all in our heads here, you know, and we can actually point to where it's happening and when it's happening.
And this God gene is just here, between the gene which we scientists now know makes us eat coconut ice cream after a fish dinner, and this gene here, which causes people with weak egos to grasp around desperately for simple explanations.
I think what Michael was talking about is our hardware, the hardware that we have inside our skulls and how it functions. And of course, there's certain ways that our hardware functions and certain connections made within the brain which lead us to make certain decisions in certain ways, of course.
Well, the Kots and the Tempertones merc the glucoses and overclock the merger chooses. There's to Vidas Grissabon and part of Isaac together to mood slevity and apetity, so fourth frame shows data vision and auditory slow perfection. Resounding friction induces corresponding blip mortalizers, but that all comes out of the Kroner's electropyramidal saltification, which you will underlie in our professor course.
Yeah, starting in around 2000, where people, particularly psychologists, social psychologists, and people who have access to tools that allow them to do scanning of the brain and things like that, are able to make observations that great minds in the past who were fantastic people at theorizing about morality just didn't have access to.
Now, the discovery of this God gene is a big step forward in our quest to show that every bit of human behavior can be explained away mechanically.
There was perhaps a non sequitur in considering whether if morality truly comes from one source, to conclude that therefore all our conclusions should be likewise or the same. I think there's a disconnect, because it could come from one single source, and yet through our hardware and through the factors involved, and indeed everything from genetics to environment and everything between, we can certainly come to different conclusions.
Because we've now also located the gene which makes some people believe that every piece of human behavior can be explained away mechanically.
Morality is a mental factor, is a mental system.
Now, resonatory friction and multicentric compulators superless the alleviating Dutch intermediary lubble Dutch, making contace and together slib temperance and expectancy. Reflection inertia corresponds to Hugo Bavertz's supercredited valence multiplicatorry equation, E equals 2R.
You're presenting a pretty hard case for a mental source for morality.
And it's here, right next to the gene that makes you go to see Nicolas Cage movies, so that's another puzzle solved.
Thus far, we have heard that morality is caused by our brains, and that we can, through neuroscience and what have you, detect the areas of the brain involved. And yet, what neuroscience can do for us is map out the brain and which parts are lighting up, but it can't actually tell you what's going on in there. It might be able to tell you that I'm having a dream, but it has no way of telling you what the dream is. And so it has the ability to tell you what hardware is functioning, but it has no ability to tell you what software, as it were, is running.
And right under this gene, which can cause you to forget that since the 1920s, quantum physics has destroyed forever the idea that everything can be explained mechanically.
One may imagine that with brains that evolved slightly differently, we might be having a completely different discussion and not agreeing that harm is wrong.
I'll say that again. E equals 2R, where R is the radiance of a home measure of the Valdry effect. And providing Pavini stems of parabolic and paraceltin reflector overleases the homovesery and heterovandal effect, so that neglectance of Mermat's atmospheric supercontraction causes structure mention of faction cavity there.
In the future, if the status of the brain could be states of the brain, the states of the brain could be scanned to reveal the mind's contents, how would this inform the speaker's views?
In the year 2000. Well, it being speculative as it is, I would just propose a very simple answer, which is that I think that there's still something about our brains being hardware and perhaps our minds being software. And I think about the movie, The True Story, It's a Beautiful Mind, where his brain kept on telling him that these people really existed, and yet his mind was finally able to figure out that because they did not age, they were not real. So his hardware was malfunctioning, but his software got him the right answer.
And we scientists now know that it's closely linked to this gene here, which gives you such a weak sense of self that you hang on to anything that makes you feel more secure emotionally, whether it's fundamentalist religion or a reductionist view of the universe.
I think it's a little difficult if we were able to, I forgot how the question put it, but basically see beyond mere parts of the brain lighting up. I think we might still have the question of what is it doing? Is it sort of forcing us to do something, or is it that which activates when there's something else causing that to happen or causing us to do something else?
Which is right over this gene here that makes you want to punch people in the head when they take the scientific process and subject it to their pathological literal mindedness. Thank you. I needed that.
I don't really know how to answer that question effectively, because it seems to me that if we had the capacity to, I guess it depends. I mean, if the question is, do we have the ability to read a mind, but only under certain conditions? So if we put them into a machine in a controlled environment, I think that would reveal a lot about human nature. But if the question is if we had the capacity to read each other's minds at will, I really have no idea what that would do, because I mean that's not how we're built. We don't do that, and morality developed based on what we are, and reading minds is not what we're able to do. So I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
And by the way, we now know that there is a gene that causes you to say, thank you, I needed that, just there, when you were punched in the head.
For Michael. Much of the brain analysis discussion still referred to an unidentified or unconscious aspect. How does this lead to a godless morality outcome when it could easily be interpreted as God?
That's actually a good question. I don't have a hammer and the nail in the coffin answer to that. I suppose you could say that this alleged unconscious capacity that hasn't been quite described yet, or recognized yet, is God. But I think my criticism with that assumption is that it doesn't make sense to me to assume that it is. Hauser, for example, is the guy who argues for it the most. I mean, I think, as far as I know, Josh Green, the guy who really does most of the fMRI stuff, he's not even convinced that this third unconscious capacity even exists. Hauser's the one saying that he thinks it does. But the point, what I would suggest to someone who says, well, maybe it's God, if we look at the science, the way Hauser's looking at it, well, I don't know what it is. So I'm not gonna suggest something until I have some evidence to give me something to go on. And from my point of view, I don't see anything to go on to say that it's God. keeping within the frame of the debate, I don't want to turn it into does God exist, but what is your foundation, or what is your justification for believing that there's a God component in morality? I understand that you say that his essence is what brings us, makes us moral, but how do you come to that conclusion?
Yeah. And just to clarify, I did not mean to imply, I know I stated it outright at the beginning, but following it might have seemed as if I was implying that you sort of receive this morality within you by adhering to God or recognizing, but I was not implying that whatsoever.
Okay.
What I'll get at this point, since I didn't bring it up at all, is that it's by the nature of us being created in God's image, part of what that means is that we have that moral nature within us as well. And so that's why I could very well agree with you that harm is wrong and still decide to go and do it, right? Because it could benefit me, it could benefit my particular in-group. And yet there's something else. You see, there's naturally occurring within me, and I'm talking about nature now, there's an impulse that says, if you must put your own life in danger to benefit the group, to help somebody else, and yet there's another instinct as well saying, don't help because there's self-preservation, just preserve yourself. And yet there's something else, it's the something else that tells me to choose the one over the other and to go ahead and help that person, even though I feel an instinct both ways, to help them and to not help them, to help the group and to help myself. There's something else. And so I could agree that harm is wrong, but still decide that I want to do it because there's some benefits, but that's something else that's telling me not just to choose one instinct or the other or use different parts of my brain, but something else beyond or behind it.
So, don't eat them.